Welcome to the Mindful Living Summit. My name is Kaylee Isaacs. I'm the founder of the Awake Network. And today we're getting started with mindfulness and learning a practice from Dr. Rick Hanson in this session. Dr. Hanson is a renowned psychologist, senior fellow of the Greater Good Science Center at UC Berkeley, a New York Times best-selling author, and his books are available in 29 languages, including Resilience, How to Grow an Unshakable Core of Calm, Strength, and Happiness, Hardwiring Happiness, Buddha's Brain, Just One Thing, and Mother Nurture. If you visit Rick's website, you can learn more about his newest book coming out, Neurodharma, New Science, Ancient Wisdom, and 7 Practices of the Highest Happiness. Dr. Hanson, thank you so much for joining us in this session.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Please call me Rick. You're Kaylee. We know each other, and I just have the highest regard for you, Kaylee, and the Awake Network and this program. I'm thoroughly excited and honored, really, to be a part of it.
Thank you. Since we're here kicking off the beginning of the summit together, I was hoping that we could start by doing an introduction to formal mindfulness practice.
Okay. Well, here too, I'm very tickled that I get a chance to talk about that. So, a little bit of foundation. People use the word mindfulness in different ways and in different contexts, and that's okay. I just think it's important to mark these distinctions so we are clear what it is we're actually talking about. So what I mean by mindfulness is sustained present moment awareness. It's very simple. It's sustained in the present awareness. It has a quality in it of recollectedness, that you're not lost in thought, you're not distracted, you're not forgetful, you're collected, you're recollected, recollected, you're gathered and present, second after second, breath after breath. This way of looking at mindfulness is grounded in sort of the origins or the roots of the contemporary mindfulness movement in the 2,500-year-old tradition of Buddhist contemplative practice. But to be clear, the Buddha did not invent mindfulness. I think about the saying on the walls of various kindergartens, pay attention, be nice, share your toys. Well, minimally, the paying attention part is about mindfulness, and it's hard to be nice or share your toys without mindfulness. And as we may talk about later, this quality of sustained present moment awareness is facilitative and foundational for compassion and kindness and engaged action in the world. If we're not mindful, we're mindless. And we wander through our days mindlessly. And that's not very helpful for ourselves, and it's certainly not helpful for other people. So that's foundational. In a little bit, maybe we'll do a bit of a practice here about mindfulness, and we can kind of mark different aspects of it. Just a couple more key points. Mindfulness can be externally directed or internally directed. We are aware in the present, in a sustained way, of the big truck driving next to us. Or we're mindful of the need to clear one's throat, still 2 weeks after having a bad flu. Or we might be mindful of the thoughts we have about, what I have to talk about next. Or the fact that we've gotten cranky, let's say, inside our own minds with resentments and preoccupations. Some of these people speak of mindfulness as it's only about self-awareness, but it's really about awareness of everything. And we can be mindful while sitting in formal practice, and especially mindful living. What a wonderful summit. We can be mindful in daily life. In fact, that's where it's very, very useful. I'll say mindfulness is useful during any kind of formal contemplative type practice, very broadly defined. It's also really useful if you feel yourself getting revved up or irritated or worried about something, or you start to realize that the person around you is not that happy with how things are going in your conversation. You can be mindful of that out there. So it's important to be mindful in everyday life, not just in formal practice, and it's important to be mindful of what's happening around oneself, as well as inside one's own interior. So that's kind of a setup, Kaylee. What do you think about that? And from your own background as a longtime meditator and a mindfulness person, did you have anything to add, or you wanted to comment on what I've said so far?
Yeah, I'm curious to talk a little bit more about the connection between the formal practice and then our ability to bring that into our daily lives. So, what is the role of actually sitting down in a chair or on a cushion or however it might be and doing this practice that's sort of removed from the world? And how does that help us when we're actually in our daily lives?
That's such a well said question because right there you can feel the tension and you can feel kind of the classic criticism of internal practice that somehow it's world denying or escapist or self indulgent. And yeah, everything has pitfalls. So, people could meditate in that way. And I've probably known some people that were at the early stages of the slippery slope into that pitfall. But on the whole, what happens is that when we do a formal practice, we get to know ourselves better. I can speak later about a lot of research on regular mindfulness practice and different kinds of meditative practice. But as we get to know ourselves better, we build up a strong core inside. We're more able to regulate our own kind of, habits of mind that are sometimes a little neurotic, speaking personally. And also, interestingly, as we engage practices of mindfulness that are themselves kind of neutral. We're just aware of what's happening. That itself is not morality. That itself is not yet compassion. Still, as we come to know ourselves, in almost all cases, people's hearts become warmer and they become more aware of connections around them between actions and effects, what helps and what hurts. And they become more moved and more capable of being useful and helpful for others at all scales, whether it's just interacting with their family in a less reactive way, in a more spacious and patient and heartfelt way. And even then scaled up, we start seeing more and more of our connection to the whole wide world, in part because we're more open to and aware of and kind of able to sustain an awareness of internal connections. We start seeing more of the connections in the wider world and are more able to skillfully help. So I think a mindfulness practice is absolutely fundamental, especially the weirder and shakier the world becomes, right? It's sort of like if you're in a very placid lake, no ripples at all, your sailboat doesn't need any kind of keel. But if you're engaged with real life and its waves and its challenges and sometimes storms, getting that keel in your inner sailboat is really, really good. And that's what mindfulness practice, that's a major thing that mindfulness practice gives us. And without mindfulness practice, we can't have that keel at all because then we're just swept by waves and wind coming at us all day long. It's also interesting that, to quote the godfather of American psychology, William James, in the late 1800s, he wrote that the education of attention would be the education par excellence. Because if we don't have the capacity to regulate our attention, we can't regulate ourselves. We can't focus on what's useful and stay focused on it. And we can't pull our focus away from what's not useful, like worrisome, thoughts just looping over and over and over and over again unproductively. Also, in terms of what's called experience-dependent neuroplasticity, that's a mouthful. It's a basic description of how the nervous system, especially the brain, is changed by our experiences. And therefore, we can use that process in terms of what I call positive neuroplasticity to guide the brain change process from the inside out and not just be swept along by what happens to us from the outside in or the bubbling up reactions from the bottom up of our own personal life history. So as we regulate attention, we regulate the front end of who we are becoming because neuroplasticity is heightened for what we pay attention to. And that's why I think that getting regulatory control through mindfulness training, and it's a training. We develop a psychological resource, namely mindfulness. We develop a personal attribute. So over time, we acquire trait mindfulness. It's easy for someone to be mindful for one breath. That's state mindfulness. But to be able routinely to just drop into staying with 10 breaths in a row quite readily, that means a person's acquired trait mindfulness from the repeated internalization of states of mindfulness, which is a quick summary of one major way to change your brain for the better. So bottom line, as we develop more trait mindfulness, we get more control over that attention which is like a spotlight and vacuum cleaner, illuminating what it rests upon and then sucking it into us. We get more influence over who we are becoming, both internal processes and what we know of the world around us. So if I were to name two fundamental qualities to develop, it would be mindfulness and compassion. And from the two of those, wisdom will spring.
Thank you, Rick. So I think it would be wonderful to dive into a formal training, a meditation practice where we could experience this for ourselves and also go through the different steps of really how to do this practice as we're training to bring mindfulness and compassion into our lives.
That's great. And it's through the kind of trainings that I'm going to guide us all through in a moment that we strengthen this muscle. We strengthen this capacity. It's not the only way to become more mindful through formal, somewhat meditative practice. We can deliberately bring more recollectedness, more present moment awareness into our day through little repetitions or little reminders of various kinds, or just kind of returning to it, making it a value for oneself. So just meditative practice is not the only way to develop mindfulness. That said, it's a very, very good way. And again, a lot of research has shown that in part through engaging formal practice, people can acquire the trait of mindfulness better over time. So, you want to give it a try? All right. I'm going to go a little deep here. You've allowed me to do this, and so I'm going to walk through 4, in a loose sense, levels of mindfulness, and they will mark different ways people talk about mindfulness, so you'll have more clarity about what they're talking about when they're talking about this thing and how it relates to the other things. And probably over about 15 minutes, I hope we're going to access some pretty good places inside. As with any formal practice, 2 things are happening. We're making efforts inside our minds, including the effort of trying to make as little effort as possible, which we'll get to. But there's something we're engaged with, right? And then the second thing is whatever happens. It's a win-win either way. Either you do the practice and you get a kind of result that you're aiming for, loosely, or there's an opportunity for learning. What's the obstruction here? Now, key point is that as we do this practice, and I'll make a couple of suggestions along the way, there are factors in the mind that are supportive of dropping into mindfulness. For example, tranquility in the body, letting the body increasingly relax rather than being agitated, tense, or stressed. Another thing that helps is an attitude of curiosity and gentleness toward whatever you're experiencing. Present moment awareness, well, sometimes what we're aware of is not pleasant, or it's disturbing, or it grabs us. So rather than being swept along and identified with whatever is happening in the mind, we're with it and observing of it at the same time. We feel it while witnessing it and not being swept away by it. It's a little bit like sitting along the banks of the stream of consciousness, almost like a river. And at this moment, there's what's in front of you in the stream of consciousness. So you be with it, you recognize it without being carried along by the river itself. It has that quality. And so what helps too there is a sense of acceptance, curiosity, and even a warm-heartedness for yourself, so that if what you're aware of is unpleasant, painful, or a little troubling, there's a feeling of friendliness toward yourself, a support that could have a tender sense of compassion or a more muscular sense of, I'm not going to get all caught up in that. I'm going to let those old boots and, cans and twigs and leaves float on down the stream of consciousness without hopping on board. So those will help here too. All right, so let's begin knowing that whatever your experience is valid and fine, and that you're very free to alter my suggestions for whatever works for you. I'm going to offer suggestions and perspectives from my own background, which has its privileges and constraints, and I'm going to leave things out. So if there's an instruction or a suggestion that you find really helpful for you, please really bring it in. Okay, so let's begin. First stage or foundation is to steady your mind. So I invite you to be aware of some object of attention. Classically, it's the sensations of the body, particularly the sensations of breathing. But if there's anything uncomfortable for you about focusing on breathing or your body, as there is for some people, particularly those who've gone through trauma, feel free to choose something else, such as a word like peace or om. You could pick an image, such as the feeling of being in Tuolumne Meadows in Yosemite Park. That's a favorite meditation object for me. Or the feeling simply of something like gratitude. Or an image, perhaps a candle, or a sacred image for you. Some people, to name it, connect prayer with mindfulness practice. I'll stay in the frame of secular mindfulness here, but I certainly want to include that for some people, their object of attention is something that for them is spiritual, even sacred. So I'll refer to the breath, knowing you can choose other objects. See if you can be aware of the feeling of breathing for one whole breath in a row. And then a few more, maintaining, sustaining present moment awareness. Remaining aware of your body so that any distracting thoughts can become very obvious by contrast. Your eyes may want to stay open, they may want to close. It's fine either way. It can be helpful to find a posture that's comfortable and alert. Maybe sitting up a little straighter. Finding a sense of dignity, a sense of being here in this place, stable and present. From time to time, you might like to register what it's like to be stably present. Being aware of the body is particularly helpful in remaining present. Neurologically, being aware of the internal sensations of your body through what's called interoception. Could be a feeling of the chest rising and falling. That interoception tends to quiet inner chatter, helping us be more present. And you can be mindful of sensations as you move an arm, perhaps, as I am. Or your shoulders, what's it feel like? You can remain present if your eyes are open by turning your head from side to side. You're still present. It can help to bring in a calming in your body, a relaxation. It might help to bring in a sense of warm-heartedness, perhaps aware of the feeling of breathing in the area of the chest. So this first of 4 aspects of mindfulness is often called focused attention, and a very absorbed form of focused attention is in concentration practice, such as really giving yourself over to the sensations of breathing for 10, 20, 30 or more minutes in a row. We won't do that depth of practice right here, but it is very important to establish a basic capacity for focused attention, steadiness of mind, so that as we move, as we will, into more open, spacious forms of mindfulness, we don't get swept away. We retain that stability of presence, usually grounded in the sense of the body. Then, if you like, we'll move into the second sort of aspect of mindfulness, sometimes called open awareness, which we'll explore in 2 steps. So I'll be quiet for a couple of minutes here as you see what it's like to retain that ongoing anchor of attention, object of attention, such as the feeling of breathing, perhaps at a particular place like the upper lip, or the internal sensations of the chest rising and falling, maybe the belly, the diaphragm, or even your body as a whole. Staying in touch with some object of attention while opening awareness and kind of relaxing and just letting sounds pass on by, thoughts if they do, maybe sights, feelings. So you're opening the spotlight of attention wider now to be with your whole stream of experience while remaining stably present for the next couple minutes. open awareness, we're retaining just enough of a sense of the object of attention to remain present, while opening wider and wider to all of who we are in this moment of consciousness, in this one. Aware and letting go. Letting go of the past, letting go of the future, letting go of the present as soon as it appears. Not trying to nudge our experiences in any direction. And then in the third aspect of mindfulness, I think of as a deeper level, it's a kind of open awareness in which we're mindful of adding as little as possible. Just sitting, present, simply being. And in this third step here, being aware of what it's like to be you, while adding as little as possible to your experiences. It could be called fabricating or constructing as little as possible. Abiding receptively. If little thought bubbles come up, little reactions want to carry you along, try to disengage fairly quickly from them. And it's okay if it's not that clear to you. I'm taking you through 4 deep practices, and the last 2 may take some getting used to, but you can do it. Being present, adding as little as possible, not needing to know anything, not needing to understand, not needing to figure out or solve or plan or fix, not even needing to be anyone in particular. So I'll be quiet again for some time. Present, open, disengaging from experiences as soon as they appear, adding little at all. Simply being awake with as little doing as possible. fourth and perhaps deepest level, as your mind is quieting, what becomes more and more prominent is awareness itself. And in this fourth step, we're going to explore abiding as awareness. There will be content of various kinds moving through awareness, like the sound of my voice. But there's a growing sense of simply being aware, with little engagement with the objects of awareness, experiences of various kinds. So I'll be quiet here as well for a couple minutes as you sort of help yourself more and more simply be aware. In a sense, you're aware of being aware. If you start conceptualizing about it, you're moving out of simply being aware. It's okay. Just come back to the ground, a ground of awareness, being aware. As you are aware, there may be a sense of a depth to awareness that feels somewhat impersonal, not personality-based. And even if you relate to this, there can be a sense of a depth of awareness that is even transpersonal, non-local, perhaps beyond ordinary reality. And if you don't have a sense of that, it's perfectly fine. So I'll be quiet for another couple minutes here. As you abide aware, open and aware. And as we finish up here, if you like, it's okay to now make a little bit of deliberate effort in your mind to get a sense of whatever's been beneficial for you in this practice. It is sinking into you in some way. Spreading inside you, maybe like a warm glow, perhaps sifting down into you as mindfulness establishes itself in you. And you establish yourself in mindfulness, in these 4 deepening aspects of it. You might open your eyes if they're not open already, and deliberately move your body. Deliberately moving your body in a little bit of an active way while retaining the sense of presence and calm abiding and open awareness that you've been cultivating here in this practice. Registering now more complex language for me as we retain some sense of present moment awareness. A key point I'll make as we finish here is that I consider what we just did, particularly its 2nd, 3rd, and 4th steps, to be an advanced practice. So if there was any difficulty with it, it's perfectly understandable. And it's a little audacious to try to do that in 20 minutes, but we did. And you can certainly take longer with that whole 4-step practice if you want, or just focus on one of them. And if you start getting spacey or scattered or lost, and these more refined, we could say, not better, just more refined aspects of mindfulness, if you get lost there, just go back to the basics. Focused attention. This moment, this breath, establishing yourself. Okay, great. That's the meditation. I did it with you. I liked it. How about you, Kaylee? Were you able to do that with us?
Yes, I was. Thank you, Rick. And I think just, going through that with everyone, there's a noted difference in how we might feel having begun that meditation and then at the end. And I'd love to talk a little bit about what's happening on a physiological level and what's happening in our brains as we're going through this process, because there's a real felt experience of it, and I think understanding on several levels can be helpful for understanding what's really happening here.
That's a deep question. A lot of research on what's happening in the brain. Really briefly, most of the research on meditation has been done on focused attention or open awareness. There's a growing focus on what's happening when people are more abiding as awareness, which Diana Winston talks about as natural awareness, and different traditions develop it quite a lot. In terms of focused attention, a key part of the brain called the frontal anterior is what it means. Cingulate cortex, it's kind of in the middle, down, it's cortical. And it's a part of the brain that keeps us on track. It's a part of the brain that registers when we're off track or on track. It does what's called error monitoring. So it's sort of like a little inner witness of how well we're remaining mindful. And it lets us know, oh, mind wandered. Now here's a key point. Wandering mind is natural. To bring it back is where we get the value. It's the returning and the staying that's full of value. I think of the description of his life of practice from Milarepa, the great Tibetan sage. Looking back on his whole life, he said, in the beginning nothing came, in the middle nothing stayed, in the end nothing left. And that's a beautiful description of the process, including with regard to much smaller things over the course of a single meditation, let's say, or a week, let alone an entire lifespan. So it's natural that as we practice, we get better at this. In the beginning, nothing came. Steadiness of mind didn't come. In the middle, it didn't last. It kept falling away, and we had to keep regenerating it. But by the end, for him certainly, he had established profound steadiness of mind, and it didn't go. So that's a way to think about the process. With practice, focused attention gets less effortful, and activity in the anterior cingulate cortex and the kind of executive regions of the brain in the front tends to get quieter. And we move more into open awareness, where there's a growing stability of presence that takes less and less neurological effort. And one of the interesting findings on people with long-term practice is that you would think that as they develop these muscles in their brain, they would get more active. Actually, they get less active because they're more efficient. And the effort it takes to just plop your attention into your body and kind of hang out there mostly for most of the next 600 seconds, 10 minutes. You know, maybe 50 to 100 seconds max, you're wandering. Otherwise, plop, you're here. It's a legitimate aim, especially with a little bit of background in meditation. So that develops over time. Now, I want to highlight the distinction I made between open awareness as kind of calm witnessing or present moment witnessing of the streaming going by. And I want to differentiate that from the third step I took you through, which is one in which we're fabricating as little as possible. And there's a fuzzy distinction there between the second and the third. Both of those are often spoken of in open awareness. The latter, the unfabricated form, more as choiceless awareness. We're making no choices. We're just simply abiding. Perhaps in Zen they might speak of it as shikantaza, just sitting. Which then takes us naturally into the sense of being awareness itself. And this is where we get into some mysteries. How does the brain manage to be aware? What are the neural correlates of consciousness? Not a huge amount of research there yet, but there too, particularly in deeper forms of meditative practice, there's a kind of stability of a loop between the thalamus or thalami, there are two of them, major sensory switchboards in the brain, and the prefrontal cortex. There's a kind of circuit there, and that's why anesthesia, loss of consciousness, very much often involves cutting that circuit in one, pharmacological way or another. So to kind of sum it up, long-term practice of any kind of meditative mindfulness training leaves lasting physical traces in the brain, connects different parts of the brain better, tends to calm down the reactive alarm bell of the brain, the amygdala, and over time tends to promote increased what's called gamma range, brainwave activity. These are brainwaves firing 30 plus times a second, 30, 50, 80, even 100 times a second, really fast, which synchronizes large parts of the brain because they're, it's like clapping your hands 30 or more times a second. They get very integrated and synchronized with gamma wave activity, and long-term meditators are able to drop into high levels of gamma wave activity readily, and they seem to have more trait gamma wave activity, indicating a greater sense of integration and wholeness in themselves and capacity to learn from the experiences they're having. So those are the major findings. That's a quick summary. There's a lot more to it than that, but that's enough for now.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the experience of challenge in our practice and also in our lives. And, I remember back to the first intensive meditation I did. It was during a weekend retreat. And the very first session where we did a longer practice like that, there was a discussion afterwards. And a lot of people were saying, wow, I really felt connected to my body, and I felt like really an openness and just sharing all sorts of glorious experiences. And I felt uncomfortable, fidgety, more tight, and like a difficulty through the practice. So I'm sure that of all of the thousands of people that have just watched and participated with us in this, there's going to be a range of experiences. And I'd love if you could speak a little bit to both. How do we work with the experience when it doesn't feel relaxing and when it doesn't seem like our mind is quieting?
Yeah, well, there's some very important key points here. So one is that really even under optimal conditions, it's natural for the mind to wander a bit and to bounce around. Arguably, in terms of the evolution of the brain, that was adaptive back in the Stone Age or Jurassic Park to kind of bounce around. You'll see creatures in the wild. I look out my windows and I see many birds and some squirrels, and they're all looking around, right? Friend or foe. Can I eat it or is it going to eat me? So it's natural. Then on top of that, very important, people vary in their temperament. There's a normal distribution in terms of the capacity to focus attention and not be distracted and not be hungry for new stimulation. Just naturally. I kind of think of it as sort of like turtles at one end of the attentional temperament spectrum and jackrabbits at the other end. And if by nature a person is more of a spirited, maybe even moving into the ADHD end of the range, which I don't think of as a disorder. It's just simply a lot of distractibility, a lot of stimulation seeking, a lot of, not the greatest impulse control. So normal range, really useful in hunter-gatherer bands to have diversity of types. But today, in modern culture, it's tough to be a jackrabbit sometimes, especially if you're going up through a school or going to a meditative program run by turtles, 4 turtles in turtle pens to train turtleness. That's tough. That's why I think it's really important to honor your temperament and to find objects of attention that are stimulating enough to keep you focused. That's why if you just lose it after 4 breaths in a row trying to pay attention to the sensations around your nose and upper lip, be aware of your whole body. Or move beyond the breath to something that's more emotionally engaging, like feelings of gratitude. Take gratitude as your object of attention. Or meditate by walking. We are to be mindful sitting, this is a traditional instruction, sitting, standing, walking, or lying down under all conditions. And the Buddha has a long list, actually, of conditions in which we should be mindful, and some of them involve using the bathroom. So mindfulness is full spectrum, right? So it's okay to pick objects of attention that are more stimulating enough to keep you present, while also not being so stimulating, like playing video games, that you don't train the muscle of greater steadiness of mind. So that's important. And then on top of that, if you throw life experiences and culture, trauma, growing up in chaotic environments, going to tend to move people more toward the jackrabbit end. Cultures that are bombarding us with stimulation, training us to always want more stim, otherwise it's like breathing through a straw. You're going to be kind of like that. Or recent events, maybe you're really worried about something, or you just had an argument with your partner and it's going to affect your meditation. So taking all that into account is really okay. And then making little skillful adjustments that would help you. What time of day you practice formally, morning, evening, does it work to do some yoga first? Does it work to take a shower, when you kind of get home and just get stuff out of your hair? I know some people who genuinely practice walking their dog. It's stimulating, it's present, their dog doesn't talk back, and yet they do it meditatively. They don't just go out there and space out and have their mind wander, though there's a place for that too. All right. Another key point, what do you do if when you open to your experience, stuff bubbles up that's problematic? And here's where I want to name some important factors of stable mindfulness, resources for it that are really important. Being able to disidentify or step back from upsetting experiences or imagery is an important resource to develop, to be able to step back and observe. In psychological language, sometimes called the observing ego. It's not really the ego, but you're just observing rather than being glued to the movie. Another factor is kindness for yourself and self-compassion. I believe that other teachers in this program will focus on that, so I won't speak much to that. But can you bring a warmth? Can you bring a support? Can you be an ally to yourself when suddenly you find yourself thinking about stuff or reacting emotionally to things that are really difficult for you? Another key is to know yourself. If you know that in the basement of your mind is a lot of spooky stuff, for good reason, based on your life, your world, maybe your current conditions. If you know that, be especially careful. And I think it's helpful to focus on objects of attention that feel good and are comforting, like just the feeling of a soft cloth. That's an object of attention. The feeling of connection and kindness and compassion with someone who's with you is really good. Maybe the smell of your grandmother's kitchen and her presence as you were making cookies together as a little kid. That's your object of attention. That'll bring in these factors of compassion and support to yourself that makes it easier to tolerate what might bubble up and less frightening the prospect that it might bubble up. And it allows you to dwell more or rest attention primarily in what is nurturing and beneficial and feels like a refuge for you, even if other thoughts or images or feelings kind of bubble up on the edges of awareness. You're centered in a good refuge. So the greater the challenges, the more the resources, the greater the resources need to be, including that sense of refuge as you face what's difficult. And then the last point to make about this is that if you do know that you're vulnerable in various ways, maybe your self-regulation is shaky for various reasons, and also if you happen to know that there could well be a lot of material bubbling up, don't commit to a 10-day silent Vipassana meditation retreat. Take it easy, slow it down. First of all, do no harm. First of all, to yourself, and be attentive to the risks. So mindfulness, for most people, when practiced relatively informally in daily life, has, risks are pretty uncommon. And if something does bubble up that's problematic, disengage. Stop meditating. Change the channel. Wash your hands. Look out the window. Do something different. It is also true, though, that for some people, a real fraction of the people engaging mindfulness practice who have the vulnerabilities I've named, not strong self-regulation and maybe a fair amount of really problematic material, be careful, particularly with more intensive forms of practice like a meditation retreat.
Yeah, I really appreciate this broader frame of acknowledging where we're coming from, what might be coming up for us, and also just the differences in our temperament. And I guess maybe to continue to use me as an example, as someone who would be more of a speedy temperament, maybe. There's also a large amount of benefit that has come into my own life from doing longer meditation practices, even when it was uncomfortable, and sort of the ability to sit with the boredom and the anxiousness or antsiness or distraction that inevitably will come up, I think for anyone, regardless of their temperament. And so I'm also wondering if you could speak a little bit to that side of how to sit with what's uncomfortable, even when our meditation might not be as peaceful and joyful as we might want, and what the value in that might be.
Yeah. Great, fantastic question. So one, particularly in the focused attention phase, which is really important to establish that, because a lot of people jump past focused attention to forms of open awareness, even choiceless awareness or abiding as awareness. It sounds really groovy, but gone. Or they struggle with it. They didn't do the basics, the fundamentals, focused attention. So it's good to establish that, because that also helps you tolerate stuff that's coming up, because you don't get sucked into it. You can stay focused on your object of attention rather than getting hijacked by that worry or that memory of your childhood. And to help yourself focus attention, I just want to name a couple of classic methods. One is to count. So if you're using the breath, count up to a number or down from a number like 4 or 10. If you want to really go for it, you could try to get 10 tens in a row. So you stay with the breath, and it's not about counting. You have the sense of counting as little as possible, kind of in the back of awareness. Mostly you're in the physical sensations of breathing. And as you complete a 10, you move a finger out. So maybe start with your hands closed and then move a finger out, or start with your hands open and bring a finger in. So you can kind of help yourself stay with 10 tens in a row, which takes about 5 to 7 minutes. And it's no small accomplishment to be there with each breath, 100 in a row. That's good training, but it's a stretch, to be clear. You can also just simply use what's called a noting practice. We're not counting, but you're bringing a little bit of language to it, like for the breath, in, out, or rising, falling, falling. That can help you stay more present, including when you're fidgety or a little zippy, a little jumpy, or just not feeling good in your body, or there's something worrying you. These methods of steadiness of mind will help. Part one. Part two, I really do want to call out a couple of things that I have found very, very helpful in terms of regular practice. So one is to know why you're doing it. I'm doing it because, for example, I want to know myself better. I want to be more comfortable in my own skin. I don't want to be so afraid of what's behind those doors I've closed inside the mansion of my mind over the years, including little ones. I want to understand myself. I want to be more comfortable in myself. Also, I want to be more autonomous. I want to be more self-reliant rather than being buffeted by one reaction after another based on what's happening outside or just stuff arising in the mind. I want to feel like more and more I'm kind of like the captain of my own ship. I'm right. I can influence who I am being, how I am acting, where I am going. Mindfulness is foundational for self-reliance. How can we be an autonomy? How can we be at all autonomous? How can we regulate and guide ourselves if we're not mindful of what's happening inside and able to sustain presence for more than 10 seconds in a row, right? It's really absolutely fundamental. So know why you're doing it. Another is very much to bring in and be willing to bring in warmth, compassion, support for yourself if you're dealing with difficult things. And that's where I just want to repeat my comment about refuge. What can you take refuge in? And the kind of more scattered your mind is, the more you need to collect in terms of steadiness of mind and focused attention. The more uncomfortable physically you are. Maybe your body hurts while you're sitting or meditating, or maybe you're upset about something. The bigger that material, the more part is to dwell in a warm-hearted, growing feeling of well-being, peacefulness, contentment, love. These are factors of mindfulness to feel calmer in your body, more peaceful in the moment, less anxious, less threatened in the moment. That will help you stay mindful and it'll help you bear what's arising. It won't matter so much. It might be unpleasant, but it won't bother you because you're increasingly dwelling in this unshakable core of resilient well-being that's more and more hardwired through practices in this summit and that others will teach through your own personal practices. You will hardwire this quality of resilient well-being into yourself, which for me has three primary aspects to it. Peacefulness, sense of safe enough. Second, contentment, a sense of enoughness already, not needing to chase the next shiny object. It's okay to want more, it's all right. And in this moment, there's an enoughness already. You feel already grateful, already contented, and warm-hearted, loved and loving, love flowing in, love flowing out, kind of resting here, both as a factor of mindfulness and as what is gradually naturally developed over the course of a mindfulness practice, both over the lifetime as well as in 10 minutes, let's say, of formal meditation. It's okay as you be mindful to gently open to, even if you're doing pretty receptive, choiceless awareness, it's okay, a little bit of nudging once in a while to be a little more open, a little more grounded, a little more peaceful, a little happier, a little more contented. Even if around the edges is worry or depressed mood even, in the core of your being, there can be an all rightness already. And of course, warm-hearted and caring for other people. That will also really help deal with whatever is troubling that arises.
Thank you, Rick. As we're coming to the end of our time together, again, so lovely to go through this practice and dig in a little deeper with you. And I'm wondering if there's anything you'd like to say to the folks watching before we close, maybe some way that they can practice this in their life today or bring it into their daily activities.
Well, I'd like to name a couple key things here. This could be slightly controversial, but generally my own experience, and I think a good deal of research, supports a kind of distinction between mindfulness and compassion. And while it is true that regular mindfulness tends to facilitate or naturally call up compassion, and it is said that in the depths of awareness, particularly the more impersonal, even transpersonal depths of awareness, there's a natural benevolence. There's a natural, what people call loving awareness. I'm fine with that. That said, I think that my experience and research shows that it's very useful to deliberately cultivate aspects of warm-heartedness, compassion, kindness, happiness at the welfare of others, interpersonal skills that can bring together a warm-heartedness for other people with respect for yourself and taking care of your own needs, maybe while being assertive too. These are things that are important to cultivate in their own right, and unlike some, I don't think they just naturally occur, and they don't certainly naturally get developed to their fullness through mindfulness practice alone. It's also true that as you develop self-compassion and warm-heartedness and other traits such as gratitude or insight or personal morality and virtue, then those aid your mindfulness. It's a lot easier to be mindful. It's also important, in my view, to help yourself deliberately cultivate what you want to cultivate. Sometimes mindfulness can be misunderstood in, I think, two key ways. First, because when we move through those four levels, if you will, nothing but mindfulness, little but mindfulness is present as you drop down into open awareness, abiding as awareness, right? What's happened is that sometimes people say any form of effort in your mind, any form of letting go of what's problematic or any form of letting in what you want to develop, that's not mindfulness. Because mindfulness equals choiceless awareness, which is pretty inert. It's a wonderful meditative technique. Increasingly, it becomes a kind of way of life as people mature in their practice. I can relate to that. That said, to turn it into kind of a dogmatic ideology as the only way to be, period, or the only way to be mindful, is a deep misunderstanding of mindfulness. And second, it's, in my view, a very unwise approach to practice altogether. There is a place for more active forms of practice, and we are to be mindful whether we're in the barest forms of consciousness in the present moment or really trying to develop ourselves in some deliberate way or learn from the last argument we had with our partner how to do it better the next time. It's okay to be mindful under all conditions. That's the point of mindfulness. Mindfulness doesn't just equal only receptive, choiceless awareness. Key point. Another, I think, really key point is that it's okay to deliberately, guide your brain and your mind to a better place through learning. There's a place for cultivation. Bhavana in Sanskrit or Pali, the languages in early India, root traditions here. So cultivation, learning. It's okay to help yourself at the end of a meditation, as we did here, to kind of have the benefits sink in. And it's okay to deliberately cultivate factors of mindfulness, like being able to regulate your attention or bring a warm-heartedness to things that are maybe distressing for you. It's really okay. It's really, really, really okay. So I want to rattle on about that. The last thing I'll just say is that if people want to learn more about different things you can do to be more mindful or ways to use mindfulness to grow other things such as resilience or happiness, well-being, or even wisdom, I encourage you to check out my website, rickhanson.net. I've got tons and tons and tons of freely offered resources there, as well as some really neat online programs that are highly accessible and well-structured and well-organized, and you can see those as well. Plus, you can learn about my new book coming out, Neurodharma, New Science, Ancient Wisdom, and 7 Practices of the Highest Happiness, which talks about mindfulness as well as other qualities we develop on our own path of awakening. You can see people perfecting them at the highest reaches of human potential. But along the way, these things are really, really useful, such as the very first of the 7 I talk about, steadying the mind. So anyway, I encourage you to check that out. And the last thing I'll just say is that we live in pretty unmindful times, mindless times. And as we engage the world around us at work, raising a family, managing a home, as we contemplate the state of the world, politics, elections, the global climate crisis, as we face these things, it's more important than ever to be able to establish that sustained presence of mind, moment by moment, breath by breath, for our sake and also for the sake of all other beings.
Thank you, Rick. And for anyone watching, if you want to learn more about Dr. Hanson's work, we will put a link on this page below the video in his bio where you can check out the website and also his newest book. I was part of a project where we filmed a full retreat where you were presenting that material, and it's just really helpful stuff. So I'm also looking forward to reading it soon when it comes out. And thank you again so much for joining us for this session.
Oh, it was an honor. I loved talking about this, and I'm still affected by that meditation we did. It was really nice.
Thanks, everyone.